He knew it. All right, please rise for the pledge. Call this meeting to order. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Apparently they moved the flags on us. I was looking where there was not a flag. All right, could I get a motion to approve the agenda, please?
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Motion carries. We are now on to, do we have any resident comments and or questions? We'll leave that open for a while. No reports, no public hearings. I'd entertain a motion on the consent agenda.
Make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Vicki, do you need me to go? Okay. It's like you know what I'm going to ask. Mr. Steinman, moving on, 9.1 bond issuance, set sale date.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council.
I like your haircut.
Yes, I did that for you this morning.
Summer cut, I like it. I was told in the previous work session I need a haircut.
You have two resolutions before you this evening to set the sale date and time of the sale for your Series 2018A and 2018B. Your 2018A is the $4,950,000 general obligation secured capital improvement plan bonds for the construction of your City Hall. And then you have a B series, which is $785,000 general obligation secured storm utility revenue bonds. The A series is financed over a 20-year term, and that series has a maximum par amount of $4,950,000 that we cannot exceed on sale day. And your B is storm water utility bonds. They are financed over a term of 10 years. So we'll be on a rating call on the 18th of June in preparation for the sale date, which is the 2nd of July at 10 a.m. And that evening I'll bring the results back to you here at 7 p.m. With that, I'm happy to take questions. Otherwise, there's two resolutions before you.
All right, any questions for Mr. Steinman on the two resolutions before us? No questions.
I'll make a motion to approve Resolution 119-18, providing for the competitive negotiated sale of $4,950,000 general obligation capital improvement plan bond Series 2018A.
So there's a motion by Councilmember Monroe
I'll second that.
and a seconded by Councilmember Henry. I almost said Hank again, sorry. So there's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Is that what you needed? Okay. Moving forward to the next motion, 12018 resolution.
So I'll make a motion to approve Resolution 120-18, providing for the competitive negotiated sale of $785,000 general obligation utility revenue bonds Series 2018B.
Motion by Councilmember Johnson.
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Monroe. There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. That was easy for you. That might be the easiest one yet.
Sure.
So we're going to see. So we'll see you. Did you say the bonds will be issued July 2nd? Correct. Okay. And at 10 a.m. and then we have a meeting later that day? Yep. Okay. Thank you, sir.
We'll see you in a month, Paul.
We are now on to 9.2, our 2017 audit. Mr. Nelson. Sir.
Good evening, Mayor and Council.
Good evening.
Good evening. Very formal.
I always like to start by saying thank you for having us as your auditors. We do appreciate that. I am going to be going over the management letter tonight. Kathy informed me that you guys have the financial statements in front of you as the packet. If you want to follow along in the management letter, you will probably need to look at your PDF copy. So that is just kind of my start. I also like to start by saying thank you to Kathy and to Brent and the staff as well for putting all the information together. They were a big help, so thank you. We appreciate that as well.
Well, I'd like to thank you. You and your staff do a great job, and you incorporate and you listen to what Brent and Kathy say, and it's appreciated. You guys have been doing our audit for a long time, but I think this is your first in the direct chair, isn't it? Second.
This is my second audit. This is my first time in this chair doing this presentation.
That's right. That's right. So you guys have done great work, and we appreciate you.
Well, thank you. So I will, again, be going through the management letter. So I'll just start by, going over why we're here. We are required to give an audit opinion on the financial statements themselves, which is, the packet you have there. We did issue a clean, unmodified audit opinion this year, which is the cleanest and the best opinion that the city can get. So that is a good thing. To arrive at that conclusion, we tested a number of different transactions surrounding disbursements, payroll, receipts, utility billing, financial reporting, things along those lines. So, we didn't find any issues to report other than the finding that's listed on page 3, which is the preparation of financial statements. A very common finding, one the city's had in the past. Just noting that we did, as auditors, put together the financial document themselves, and it is the responsibility of the city and its management to take responsibility for what we have prepared. So again, a common finding, nothing really out of the ordinary to point out there, just something we're required to report. The second piece of the audit that we are required to do is give an opinion on the Minnesota State Auditor's compliance. The Auditor's Office puts out legal compliance guides on their website, and we're required to test those transactions and everything that's in those guides. A couple examples of those are testing of bidding and contracts, payments of bills and how the checks look and things of that nature, along with collateralizing the bank balances. And another one I like to point out is conflicts of interest as well. So no audit findings related to any of those, so again, I think a good thing there. I will flip ahead to page 4 here. So another thing we point out in our management letter is looking at some of the estimates that were used to arrive at the financial data in the financial statements themselves. There's a list of 5 of them here. Depreciation and how long things will last in the city is one thing. Obviously, a little bit of an estimate on how long you're going to hold your assets and how long they're going to hold up. The second bullet on there is management's allocation of construction costs based on the identified amounts provided by the engineer.
I can't read it. I got to get my glasses.
Okay. Again, so do you want me to wait?
I can't see what he's saying.
Again,
I thought I brought them with me. Okay, please continue.
so management's allocation of construction project based on engineer estimates. So the city has issued bonds, and there are some projects that do have some components that relate to enterprise funds, water, sewer, storm, along with the governmental or the street portion that we allocate the bonds and some of the other construction-related costs to different funds related to that. So that's something we do like to point out. It can be a little bit of an estimate at the beginning. At the end, we do have final data that we do make adjustments for. So just something to point out there. The last one I'll point out is the management's estimate for the pension liability. The pension liability was added for GASB 68 a few years ago. The total liability for the city of Carver is about $750,000. Again, something we're required to report as GASB. We take it from the actuarial report. Nothing the city can really do about that. So again, just something I like to point out. It is based on an actuarial, again, estimate of people's, how long they're going to live and what the discount rate is probably the biggest thing is for that. So I'm going to skip ahead to page 6. Page 6 kind of starts in our analysis of the general fund and the total fund balance and related to the city's expenditures. So if we look at that chart, kind of a steady increase in the city's general fund budget over the past 5 years. Also looking at the general fund percentage, we also have a bullet here that notes the unrestricted fund balances related to the 2018 budget. We have an asterisk there too that the total fund balance represents about 50% are related to the city's policy of transferring out any remaining fund balances to the special projects fund for future capital. Again, I just pointed out and made a note too that I think that's a good policy for a city. I think it's a really good thing to fund future projects with that, and having a set plan, I think, is a good thing there. So again, I think that's been in place for the last 2 years. If you look at the actual management letter itself, it was meant to be 50% in the prior year. It does say 49.8%. I don't know if anybody's looking at it directly, but last year when we did present, it did say 50%. The general fund original budget did change just slightly. We made a transfer out at the end of the year to balance that, so that's kind of why that does say 49.8% there. So was meant to be 50 at the time. So, any questions on any of that?
That was a lot of work to get to that point, for sure.
Was. All right, I'll flip to page 7. Looking at the actual budget to actual results of the general fund. So I'll just start with the budget. Looking at the final budget, the budget was meant to be balanced with no increase or decrease in the general fund. So when we look at the actual results, the general fund did increase about $87,000. Even after that transfer out I discussed a little earlier. And how did we get to that point? I guess I'll start with the revenues. The revenues did have a positive budget variance of about $125,000. A big part of that was some of the intergovernmental revenue or some grants that were received by the city that were unbudgeted there. So, and looking at the expenditures, expenditures did have, again, an overvariance of about $25,000. There's a lot of different expenditures. A couple that I pointed out were, probably the biggest one was the flood expenditures. There was about $50,000-$60,000 of unbudgeted flood expenditures that were in there that contributed to that. My bullet point kind of relates to some attorney fees and some other government building expenditures too that related to some of that overvariance. And again, some of the transfers in and transfers out, a big piece of that transfer out was, again, like I discussed earlier. So again, that $87,000 increase in the general fund's balance. Flip ahead to page 8. Page 8 is a 3-year comparison of the city's revenues in the general fund and looking at how they break out. Not too much to point out here, just something I always point out is just looking at the taxes. About 70% of the general fund's revenue and about a $370 per capita dollar amount. So again, just something important to know that the general fund is mainly supported by general fund taxes. To page 9, which is a similar graph with the city's expenditures and looking at a comparison in per capita. The only thing I'll point out here is, looking at the budget and like we looked at before is pretty steady increase. I don't know, 2016 a little bit of a bigger transfer, but I would guess that if you took that out, that's probably a little bit of a consistent increase there. And looking at the per capita, a little bit lower in most of the areas. One of them with public safety, just a little bit lower too there, and culture and rec. So,
What's other?
What's other?
On the graph, purple.
Oh, other makes up, I believe, everything other than the general government, public safety, and public works. So it would be culture, rec, economic development, and debt service. So maybe it is just, actually it would include the capital outlay and the transfers as well, I believe. Again, the big decrease or the increase in 16 was that transfer. About 450.
Yeah, got it. Thank you. We worked around it.
All right, I'll move ahead to page 10, which is looking at the city's other funds other than the enterprise funds, and looking at first the special revenue funds. The only thing I picked to point out there, the city had an LCDA grant Carver Crossing project in the past. There was about $675,000 there that was transferred out basically to close that fund into the park development fund, which I'll talk about in a little bit here in the capital project. The LCDA grant Carver Crossing fund was no longer necessary, so we just kind of combined those two together into the Park Development Fund. So looking at the capital projects, I'll start right away at the top, just with the 2017 street improvements. Not a huge decrease from the past, but it did go up about $215,000 there. Some activity, obviously, with the street capital expenditures, as well as the bond issuance and the proceeds that ended up going there. So the $200,000 that's remaining, probably expected to be spent in the first few months of 2018. Maybe they already have. So. Again, I did mention the Park Development Fund did go up about $420,000, mainly related to, again, that transfer out from the LCDA grant fund above. And the last one I'll just point out, obviously, the City Hall is going to be rebuilt, and the construction fund was set up. There's been some engineering fees and some overages there, not a lot of, or probably zero funding or any funds there yet. Like we just listened to, the bond will be going to pay for some of those costs in the future. So that is the cause for kind of that negative amount there. So we do point out just at the bottom, the city should annually evaluate the status of each project fund and whether or not they should be closed in the future years. So move ahead to page 11, which is the city's debt service funds. A lot of information here on the city's bonds and looking at the total bonds outstanding, their maturity dates, and looking at a schedule of the next 10 years of how those bonds and the payments that are expected to be made on those bonds. Again, these are just governmental bonds. They don't take into account the city's enterprise bonds. So if you look at that $7.4 million, it probably is about half or maybe even less than half of the total bond or the debt load. But again, just looking at the city's total assets related to those total bonds outstanding, about $7.5 million. I just like to point out that obviously the remainder or the difference between the total assets that currently sit there and what the bonds are outstanding are future debt levies. I guess in special assessments too, sorry. All right, I'll flip ahead to page 12 and start with the enterprise funds. Council probably just had a meeting on some of these things, so I'll go pretty quick on these and just go from a big picture on what our graphs are and what they mean. You know, as far as the future and what to make of them, I think that is kind of being currently discussed with the rate study and things of that nature. But looking at these charts, there's two charts for each of the enterprise funds. One of them is a bar chart that looks at the city's total receipts, or excuse me, their operating receipts and their operating disbursements as a comparison. What we look for there is that the blue line exceeds or is about equal to the green and the gray bars. So obviously looking at the water fund and looking at some of the other funds too, a little bit of a shortfall or looking at the operational side of things kind of goes in line with the second graph there, which is the water cash fund balance. The water cash fund balance is a little bit colluded with, or I can't think of the word, but there is cash of fiscal agent remaining in those funds to pay the future debt service or the refunded debt service portion. So there's two bars in that cash fund or cash balances chart. So the blue bar really is what to look at there with the city's unrestricted or amounts that are allowed to be used. So if we look at those amounts, a little bit of a steady decrease from the 2014 to the 2017, which kind of relates to, again, that top graph where the blue bar is a little bit lower than those green and gray bars. So the last thing on there is the total bonds. Looking at the total bond loan to the water fund is about $9 million. So looking at the sewer cash flow balances there and looking at the receipts and disbursements, kind of a similar piece to the water fund. Again, we do look for that blue bar to kind of equal or exceed those green and gray bars. So again, something to, and obviously that is being addressed with the rate study. But and looking again down at the sewer cash fund balances, looking at that kind of that blue line kind of on a decreasing trend there too. So kind of relates to the top. I'll flip then to page 14, which is the storm. The storm, again, 2014, 2015 did have that blue bar exceeding kind of that green and that gray bar. The last 2 years, those bars have increased a little bit to there. So, and the last thing I'll point out on the storm's cash balances, Looking at that big decrease in 2017, a majority or a big portion of that is for the future stormwater project that was bonded for that hasn't been, the construction and cash hasn't been paid on those for as well. So last page I'll go over is page 15 and looking at the ratios in comparison with the peer group. So I guess I'll preface by saying that a peer group is a peer group for a reason. No city is really the same as the next. And it is made up of a population of 2,500 to 10,000. And it is just strictly population, so just meant to be number of residents there. So just a couple of things to point out. Looking at the city's debt service coverage, like we discussed a little earlier with some of those enterprise funds, that is quite a bit lower than the peer group because of some of those things there. And looking at the overall debt per capita and looking at the last two there, which is capital assets as a percentage, Carver's a growing or a newer city, which is why their asset percentage left to depreciate is a little bit higher than that peer group, which is again similar to why the debt per capita again is a little bit higher than those peer groups. So again, like I said at the beginning, peer group is just peer group 2,500 to 10,000. I think the city probably expects to be maybe in that next class up above 10,000 in the near future, or the I don't know what near future, but in the future. So that would kind of reflect in those peer group ratios there too. The rest of the management letter is future GASB standards.
I just want to go back to this page and just look at it for a second, because there were a few years where this was really hard to look at. All right, sorry. No, we're good. I just went back and looked at it, so we're good.
Okay. So the remainder of the management letter is just GASB standards. I will, for sake of time, not read those, I guess.
Thank you.
If there was any that I thought were really going to affect the city's financial statements in next year and in the near future, I'd probably go into any of those in more detail. But again, I don't think that there's any that warrant a ton of time tonight. So I will take any additional questions at this time on any of the information in the financial statements themselves or the management letter.
Any questions, comments from the council? I have a question and a comment. First question is, we have the same recommendation that we have every year, and that's we only have one person running our numbers, and that is a challenge for people in your line of work. You want that spread out, balances of power, if you will.
Segregation of duties.
Yeah, separation of duties.
Segregation of duties.
Separation of segregated duties. So we know what we're talking about. The question I have in the comment is combined. Kathy does a phenomenal job, and she's one of the best we've ever had. And in terms of preparing for the next generation, where are we? How much trouble are we in if Kathy decides to say, I'm going to retire tomorrow?
For you, Kathy.
It's while Kathy's the best, our job is to start planning ahead, and Kathy is phenomenal, and she's looks 31, but she's not going to be here for the next 30 years. So when we start doing succession planning, we need to start, in my opinion, start thinking about adding someone to Kathy's department eventually so that they can learn from Kathy. We're in trouble if she leaves, aren't we?
I mean, probably, yeah.
Yeah. Well, you would love that, because then you would get a lot of billings.
I mean, in succession planning in any position is probably important. I mean, you are a smaller city, I guess, and until you get to that bigger point, I think that it's just a cost-benefit analysis of whether another person is kind of there.
So since you're refusing to answer my question, your firm, if something happened to Kathy, or if Kathy left or went to Bloomington or anything, decided to retire, your firm can come in and keep us afloat in the meantime so that we're not totally behind the eight ball until we can actually get somebody on board.
We do have a separate division of our firm that does provide contracted finance director work to cities, yes.
Okay.
And
My point being is that we do not want Kathy to go anywhere, and we need to start ensuring that, A, she doesn't, and B, we have an understanding of what to do if, and that would, a lot would fall on you. So that was my comment and my question. Any other comments or questions? Kathy, thank you. Every time I go in and I meet with whoever I'm supposed to meet with, it was him the last 2 years, everyone speaks extremely highly of your department, which is you, and that you put us in an absolute position to succeed. So I really thank you for that. So, moving forward,
I'll make a motion to approve the 2017 audit as presented.
Second.
motion and a second. All in favor, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks, Justin.
Thank you.
We should move on to, are we going to put that on hold, or are you going to take it? All right, moving on to 9.3 solar ordinance, Mr. Merrick.
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Kathy, drive safely, nothing can happen to you.
In November of 17, the council adopted an interim ordinance related to solar energy systems and asked staff to prepare a draft study that's been studied and reviewed by the council in work session. It's also been reviewed by the Planning Commission. Some points of discussion have included ground-mounted solar energy systems as an accessory use and the location where they can be located. The draft ordinance does allow for ground-mounted and roof-mounted solar uses. It treats the solar ground-mounted as an accessory use. It must meet accessory structure standards that are contained within the ordinance. Community solar energy systems are permitted within industrial, general commercial, public institutional zoning districts as well. There's a glare study may be required for either residential or community solar permitting, and the decommissioning required after 12 months if a system is no longer in operation. So the draft.
Will you say that last part again, when it's no longer in operation?
Yep, so it must be decommissioned,
What does that mean?
basically taken down or dismantled. If it's-
It has to be, is there a time frame that it has to be decommissioned? Like if it's not being used for a month, do they take it down?
After 12 months, if it's.
So it has to be sitting, not being used for a year?
Correct.
Okay. Oh, you're done. Sorry.
As Aaron would say, complete.
Valid. Go ahead, ask a question.
In the city limits, we have a couple of parcels that are still zoned ag. Does this address if they wanted to put up any kind of solar? I know that we're talking about in the industrial areas that might come to our city later, but what about?
I don't think we
Private
have any. The
agriculture.
only parcel that's zoned ag right now, to my understanding, is, or there's two. One is the bus garage property, which we own, that we're going to be rezoning. The other is the Ellen Redmond property, which also is going through a process. Other than that, we don't have any ag properties, or when they would come in, they'd be quickly through the platting process rezoned to whatever compatible use that the council would see fit. So we don't traditionally have ag zoning districts in the
Right,
city.
but I know that we have a few remaining. There aren't any on Mount Hope Road any longer? Okay.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I thought, positive?
No, I'm not positive. I'm
You
not-
might just check, because I think, isn't
of the left-
Mike England's property ag? One with all the Christmas trees?
I can look it up. Yeah.
Right.
Is there a question related to the zoning? Maybe that'd be more efficient for me to try to answer.
No. I was just curious if it was ag or not.
Okay.
Right. I know ag has some different uses in general.
Well played. All right,
You know, Ed, I don't need the answer to it right now. He's got a bunch of trees there. It's not like he can put up a solar garden unless he cuts all the
Cuts
trees
all the
down.
trees down.
I don't think we let him do that, do we?
They're replacing.
So we have an older, looks like we have an older version on our city website, but there is, looks like at least one adjacent parcel that's zoned ag, and the body property is also zoned ag.
Yeah, I knew the body. Yeah,
So I sit corrected.
okay.
okay.
Know your ag, man.
So moving forward with the ordinance on, I struggle, and I'm not necessarily in favor of allowing ground use, just with the way that technology is changing. I think we're opening ourselves up for stuff everywhere. But that being said, this going through the planning commission, I would be actually more comfortable if we could do a decommissioning required after 6 months if system is no longer in operation, so that we can have just a little bit more control over what's going on the ground. Because I think the way things are going, it's going to be all roof and actually tiles.
How do we tell if it's not being used?
That's another brilliant question, but
I mean, is there a way to tell whether or not it's being used? If it's just sitting there,
We'd have to, I don't know the answer to
Rusting.
that. We'd have to have a conversation with the property owner and be able to verify that it's no longer in use.
that portion of the ordinance about non-use, does it also say something about, equipment that's in disrepair? I mean, like it's sitting there all rusted and,
I think that's part of our accessory structure standard ordinance
okay.
with setbacks and size, but I don't know the answer to that. I'd want clarification on that. I think, I mean, I'm all for alternative energy, and I think it's great. We're opening ourselves up, I think, long-term to having to come up with a junk ordinance when either the technology
Well,
changes
the public
and
nuisance ordinance.
these are no longer needed and they sit there, or if somebody realizes that it's not really worth
So I
it.
can read the section related to abandonment. It says, if the solar energy system remains non-functional or inoperative for a continuous period of 12 months, the system shall be deemed abandoned and shall constitute a public nuisance. The owner shall remove the abandoned system at their expense within 90 days. Removal includes the entire structure, including transmission equipment, structures, and foundations, and the restoration of soil and vegetation.
That just means they have to turn it on once in that 12 months, and they get to start their 12 months rolling over again. That's what we run into all the time.
This kind of sounds like, this portion of the ordinance kind of sounds like it would be hard to enforce. Because how can you tell if it's working or not?
Right, it almost has to be more on the nuisance level of,
Yeah,
of,
right,
falling apart and grown over and that kind of thing.
yeah.
I just don't want to put us in that position. And I really truly believe we've been talking about this a lot at the ULI group, and the ground being in a solar farm is when they sign leases for 25 years and they have 500 of these things, it makes sense because of economies of scale. The individual ones that go in a backyard end up being a nuisance, and the majority of the people that we talk with in there are recommending against it just because of technology changing and where these are supposed to go and getting the best sunlight on the roof. I would love to fight having them on the ground at all, but I don't want to fight, so.
I like the ordinance as we have it with what is allowed and what isn't. I do agree with Mike and Cindy on how we are to enforce the decommissioning if we're talking about being inoperable, because how do we test that it's inoperable? I don't know what the answer to that is.
Well, the answer to that could be not to allow any ground-mounted ones.
I like allowing the ground-mounted ones.
Yeah.
I think they've addressed, I think the planning commission, and it's been addressed very well as to following our ordinances about setbacks and things like that.
Yeah, but they haven't addressed what to do with them when you have the ones that sit and you can't do anything. They turn it on once every 12 months and they don't have to do anything with it because it's not going to be cheap to get rid of at all. So I think we're going to run into space junk.
What, if we were to, let's say, someone's shed or something is falling down, what criteria do we look at to
So
say this is?
It'd fall under our public nuisance, so if it was in a state of disrepair, so we'd typically send out the building official and he'd do an analysis. If he couldn't do it on his own, we'd bring out a structural engineer, but, you know, they'd look at, you know, building components, foundation, you know, that whatever is integral to the structure, and if those parts were in disrepair or posed a threat to public safety, then the building official would issue some type of order. You know, that there's some similarities between, you know, proving that this isn't running and like the RV ordinance, not to bring up a tougher issue or a tough issue, but, you know, we have something related to someone can't, you know, they can only stay in an RV X amount of days over a certain period. But, you know, the ability to prove that is a big task as it relates to what would constitute proof, and I think you're under the same set of circumstances here. How to verify if a system is operational, what constitutes operational. So there, I acknowledge and I would agree with the council that there is a enforcement issue with that provision.
It'll come from a neighbor suing.
But it does provide you with the ability and a provision to present, you know, in an instance where there is an issue. But that doesn't necessarily mean it wouldn't be without a challenge. But you would at least have it as a mechanism to initiate contact and try to resolve an issue in a neighborhood.
I can't vote for a 12-month, but I could vote for a 6-month so that we have a little bit more control, even though I don't want ground at all.
So you're saying if we don't change it to 6 months, you're not going to vote for it?
Correct.
Okay, I'll make a motion that we adopt ordinance 10, 2018 as is.
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries. Moving on to,
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor,
Oh,
we
yeah,
need to
yeah.
do roll call.
sure.
Councilmember Henry,
Nay.
Councilmember Mock,
Aye.
Mayor Webb,
Nay.
Councilmember Johnson,
Aye.
Councilmember Monroe.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to 9.4, civil defense siren. Mr. Merrick.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Civil defense sirens, also known as emergency sirens, are used by public safety agencies and the National Weather Service as a mass notification system. The sirens are most commonly used to notify residents of possible tornadic activity or other severe weather. The city has 4 civil defense sirens that are noted. It showed up as orange before, but this shows them as all yellow. But our 4 locations are at the intersection of 6th Street West and Jonathan Carver Parkway, Overlook Drive, the intersection of Broadway and Main Street, and Lions Park. Now you can see from an analysis that the city did, there's one new pole location recommended and a relocation. The relocation involves moving the Lions Park siren from that location north, which would be the center of the red circle, to the area of the water treatment plant. The second new pole location would be near the new water tower north of Mills Fleet Farm. The relocation would strengthen the system in the community, helping strengthen the system in the areas of the Meadows at Spring Creek, Christie's Bluff, and River Bluff neighborhoods. The new location adjacent to Mills Fleet Farm would improve service or signal strength, or siren strength, I should say, in the area of the Levi Griffin Freeway Commercial District, Carver Elementary, and the housing developments adjacent to Jonathan Carver Parkway. Now, these purchases were not included in the 2018 budget, but however, considering the nature of the improvements, also with the city does collect a new development fee related to sirens, and so that fund balance is around 12,000. We're expecting that to get between 15 and up to 15 and 25,000, between 15 and 25, or increase by 15,000 over the next 3 years to approximately 25. We're looking at a 50-50 cost share. So if you take the civil defense siren fund combined with a special capital fund, you'd be able to move forward with these, the new siren location and the siren relocation for just under just over $40,000. So happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Question?
The proposed new installation obviously has a stronger siren. The other four, are they all of a similar strength? Not to the new one, but to each other?
No, actually, like the new one down here on Broadway and Main Street is actually similar to the new proposed one. And then I believe the Overlook one is as well as that larger one. Sixth and JCP might be a little bit of a smaller radius because of the bluffs is what we're faced with.
Okay, so the one in Lions Park, you want to move up to the water tower, right?
Correct.
Okay, the one south of that, where is that one?
The one south of that's right on the red ring, that would be the one we're going to relocate. The one south of that is the one that's downtown on Broadway and Main.
Oh, on Broadway, okay.
Right out behind us here.
Okay. Okay. Thanks for that clarification.
So, excuse me, Mayor and Council, in your packet, there's we don't have the correct memo in there, so the memo that you should have in there, there should be the total cost of the project is $38,965. There's an earlier version in your packet. So it should be, the motion that we're asking you to consider is a motion to approve a quote from Frontline Warning Systems for the installation and the relocation of civil defense sirens for $38,965. My apologies for that error.
It's going to bug you all night, isn't it?
Oh, I see.
When do you anticipate the actual move?
Right now, if given the go-ahead, we'd be able to have that probably up and running here within a month and a half, is what they figured they could slate us in for.
So will we have a gap in our system then while they're moving it during the change? I mean, not a day or two, but any length of time?
During the period of the relocation of Lions Park, we'd probably anticipate putting the new one up first, so we'd have a little bit better overlap. So that area just really strengthens that area, so we really don't lose any coverage. It's just going to be louder once the other one goes in.
Any other questions?
Yeah, just one more, sorry. I'm looking at the placement of the new proposed siren. And it looks like, I mean, the area east of 11 and north of 212 is Chaska, right? Do they not have any towers up there?
I can't speak to what their coverage is up in that area, but
Okay.
being that area.
'Cause I'm wondering, could we move it further west to get more coverage for, in the future when we have more?
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit, and actually, trying to get, we could move it west. Right now, that's just a really convenient location with the water tower that's there and the land we already have purchased. So that honestly is the reason why we picked that location.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments?
I'll make a motion to approve a quote from Frontline Warning Systems for the installation and relocation of several civil defense sirens for $38,965.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to communications. Do we have any monthly department reports? Monroe? Anything?
No, I don't.
Johnson?
I don't have anything.
Mock?
I don't have anything.
Henry?
I do not have anything.
I have a
Mayor Webb.
question. We haven't talked about it in a long time, and it may be closed already, but where are we at with the Mills Tip District?
As in,
How many years left, or?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
So that closed, actually, and then the county took it over, correct?
no, it's still open.
Right, but I mean, the value hit our value. When we should have been able to take it over, the county ended up taking it over, correct? In essence.
So the district closes in this is a guesstimate, but 2021 or so.
Aye, that's what I was thinking.
If they pay it off early, the county's gonna take their portion of the value and apply it to the cost to develop that intersection. But we're
Good.
not anticipating it being paid off early.
Okay.
All right. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.